Davy and Jake, would you read one of the jail poems? I suggested 7/22/34. You haven't conferred either with each other. So I'll go to Davy first. Would you read the one you chose?
I'm actually going to pivot and have Jake go first because Jake is reading one that's before the one I chose.
Okay, great. How did you know that? Okay, Jake.
Private chat.
Oh, that chat thing. Yeah, that thing I'm trying to ignore right now.
Someone who I am is no one. Something I have done is nothing. Some place I have been is nowhere. I am not me. What of the answers I must find questions for? All these strange streets I must find cities for. Thank God for beatniks.
So I've always focused on the I identity there. And then today, when I was thinking about incarceration in relation to Bob Kaufman, I'm so pleased to say I'm actually writing a section on Kaufman in my book right now, or finishing one. And I kept thinking of incarceration in that poem, in that section, even though it's the jail is not mentioned there. What's mentioned is the city. So could you read the last few lines and see if you can go with the flow of my thinking about this as also about incarceration?
All these strange streets I must find cities for. Thank God for beatniks. Well, I think
so great, isn't it?
Yeah. My gosh, gorgeous. I mean, the whole piece is just like such dark humor. It's permeated. It's really serious on the one hand. At the same time, it certainly is ironic. When I think about streets that I must find cities for, I think like this is ultimately like nomadic, exilic kind of a mindset where you don't feel at home in a given country or even the world, but there are these pockets. There are streets that promise some kind of a liberation. I must find home. I must imagine another place. I must imagine my way out of here. It almost becomes kind of like a mystical, dreamlike experience. And I think the first lines of that stanza, "Who I am is no one. Something I've done is nothing," and like I think it's part of the same, even though they don't seem so obviously related. I think it's very much coming out of the same sentiment. Of course, we all know it's true. Like, who I am is nothing, is nobody. But some people are reminded of that more often than others, and others yet can kind of take that sentiment and go almost to like a spiritual, existential place where you read those lines, and it's just like it becomes a certain kind of almost like revelatory moment that is shared by the readers.
That's lovely. I want to turn to Davey, but Gabe, did you get most of what Jake just said, or were you in the YouTube thing?
I'm mostly in the YouTube thing. Sorry.
Okay, no, don't apologize. I just didn't want to turn to you when you hadn't thought about it. Lily, would you, after Davey finishes what he wants to say about the section that he's chosen, would you comment more about what Jake says about the city and exile feeling? I mean, I turned to you partly because you and Jake and I and Chris and Zach visited Bob Kaufman Street, which I don't know if Bob Kaufman would have liked the idea of having San Francisco officially name a street, for him, although it's a tiny little nothing street. So, but Lil, I'll turn to you on that. But Davey, would you pick one of the other two and read it and comment?
Sure. So the one that I chose was 34, which is just 2 lines. "The defective on the floor mumbling was once a man who shouted across tables." And I think that there are a number of ways. I mean, it's hard to read because it's offensive, because it's this ableist language that we get. The word defective to refer to a person, to be a metonym for a person, is extremely hard to read. And I actually, it'd be interesting to talk about this. I had some questions about whether or not I wanted to read that word. I felt not sure because of the ableism that it suggests. But in the context in which you are framing jail poems for us, Al, I can't help but think about the fact that we're living in a moment in which the carceral system in the US is the largest provider of mental health resources, of mental health care. Yeah. And that part of the way that the carceral system has operated in the US is to disproportionately incarcerate people who experience mental illness, who are psychologically or neurologically disabled. and that there's a tight relation here between the racial violence of the carceral system and the ableism of the carceral system, and a deep and entrenched set of connections that we probably don't have enough time to tease out currently. But that's certainly something that's happening there. And I think that something that's complicated about these couple of lines, and this is part of what they call up for me, is that I really can't code who shouted across tables. I don't know if that's a joyous gesture. I don't know if it's a communitarian gesture, someone who like in their organizing practice is like yelling to someone across the room. I think of like the like organizers in like cafeteria spaces in the Bay Area in the 50s. It could be an aggressive gesture. It's hard to know. All that we know is that there's like a diminishment here that's happening by virtue of incarceration.
Okay, that's really well said. What I want to do after we turn to Lily, who will comment on what Jake said, I want to ask Jason and Gabe to join me in a further conversation, a brief one, on that person who is now quote unquote defective in jail with Bob, sharing a cell probably, what that person used to do, right? That's what Davey was pointing toward. What is the mystery of what used to be? And I certainly have an interpretation of that. I just think also, Davey, that this just reminds us that in a 2-line poem, you know, one can take seriously not as overanalysis or, you know, hyperventilating lit crit, but as like a serious engagement with what this person, Bob Kaufman, is telling us in 2 lines. We can go to social factors. We can go to, you know, talk about mental health treatment or lack of in a certain time period. We can talk about San Francisco police. I mean, so much is there. So much work is being done. Anybody who says, oh, that's just neo-imagistic is, you know, really missing the point. Lily, do you want to comment on that amazing thing that Jake did a little bit ago?
Yeah, something maybe that can bridge what Jake said and what Davey was saying is when I read all these strange streets I must find cities for, I think about the ways that incarceration is physically built into our cities and the structure of our nation in this horrible way that like find a person like physically located in a prison cell may feel like they have like found themselves in a street that or like in a piece of infrastructure that is constructed to be part of the city that they're trying to unravel or figure out how it's all connected. That's what that makes me think of.
Yeah.
And then I find that this section, the someplace, nowhere, no one type of words connected me with the line in Boy Breaking Glass when
oh yes, you remember the line?
Yeah, it's nobody knew where I was and now I am no longer there. I think to take also a city or like a urban planning contextual reading of that poem could be a similar thing of like, this city was designed in this way where my recourse is to be nowhere, nobody knows who I am, so I'm breaking this piece of glass.
Yeah. I mean, Kaufman is engaging with some of the same issues that James Baldwin was engaging in the late 50s as Baldwin was producing a very different kind of writing, but produced a collection of essays called Nobody Knows My Name. I guess that was published in 1961. And they were both engaging with what Ralph Ellison was trying to figure out in the beginning of Invisible Man, which is a tradition in Black literature in the US, of course. So Gabe and Jason, what I wanted to do briefly was have Davey reread the last couple of lines of that section. Well, it's just 2 lines. The one about sharing a cell with someone who seems to have once upon a time shouted across tables. If David will reread the 2 lines, what I'd like to do is have the 3 of us do a kind of round robin, quick lightning round impression of what that history that Davey rightly said is a little mysterious, what that was. So Davey, would you reread?
Sure. The defective on the floor mumbling was once a man who shouted across tables.
So Gabe, Jason, and I are going to riff on was once what? Gabe, try one.
I think of like shouting across tables, like debating with friends. Like I thought, I honestly think of like dinner conversation.
Yep, Jason?
Mhm. I think of the thing that my brain keeps doing is misreading defective as detective.
Mm.
But
Ah,
the 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 change in relationship to like horizontal surface is so intense here, just to go to being on the floor and mumbling and having
right.
one's words kind of numbed along the floor, as opposed to one's words carrying across the air.
Yes.
But I also think, I mean, I don't know what the practices were at the time, but I can imagine, you know, like electrical, various invasive mental health treatments being forced upon seemingly mentally ill prisoners that would render their condition worse.
That certainly would be a reference to Bob Kaufman's experience, which we'll get to in a second. But I more likely, and this is my interpretation, Jason, Gabe, and Davey. You know, Bob Kaufman, recent research, just very recent research, has disclosed Kaufman's actual like membership connections to the left, to the radical left of the San Francisco area, which would be very much Longshoremen's Union, Maritime Union. Kaufman had an FBI file, which I've looked at. So he was thought of as not just a beatnik on the side of the road, getting drunk so much that they just kept putting him in jail, but also experienced what happens when radicals met the police and they were just literally beaten up. And I just keep thinking that the person who's on the floor, who's been rendered quote unquote defective, is someone who was very politically engaged. Sort of, Gabe was going halfway there by talking about, you know, the arguments you would have in a cafe over coffee or wine. But I think Kaufman might be referring to someone he actually shared a cell with, whom he knew from organizing in the 40s and 50s. I think that story may be back there. And of course, that tells you everything you need to know about what happened to radical politics as it met the beat period. And so the last line of the poem that Jake read, which is what, Jake?
Sorry,
The last line about beatniks.
Oh, thank God for beatniks.
Thank God for beatniks. It's either straight, like beatniks are the only ones that are going to help this guy up now, this old political guy, or it's ironic, like the beats haven't really engaged with these political questions. Gabe, will you add something?
Yeah, so there's a Tongo Eisen Martin line that's something like, I'm paraphrasing here, if a city has a prison in it, the city is a prison, it's not a city. And I kind of think like in this line, I feel like you get the way the prison and the sort of, we might imagine like a mental health institution or something like that, controls the social. So I feel like shouting across tables, to me, whether it's a good or bad or kind of intense or passionate or nice shouting across tables, it doesn't matter so much as it's a social form that's now caught in just mumbling alone.
Yeah.
And I feel like what's important there is that the mouth is holding the work of preserving that social instinct, even when a prison complex is cutting off, defining, and like attenuating any kind of social possibility for that person. So the mouth still wants to go, I guess.
Yes. And this is how Kaufman felt about his poetry. He would refuse to think of it as mumbling, but he wanted to include, accept, and permit mumbling which was partly for himself a result of involuntary shock treatment, which was delivered to him by the police of New York City as he was preparing to meet his wife and child who preceded him back to San Francisco. And he was literally like packed up and ready to go when he got plucked from the street, just profiled and given shock treatment at Bellevue, which is the most horrible thing you could possibly imagine, as he was trying to just get back to his wife and kid. And it changed his life. He actually kind of went silent after that for a long time.